Hello, everyone. Professor Sexton here with a short video on common sentence errors. This is going to be the only grammar lesson that I will give for the entirety of the semester. For any other grammar concerns that will happen, I will just mark those on your papers and comment on them then and give you any advice that you need in order to address them in the future. Um, and it was all other grammar concerns will be on an individual basis. The reason why I'm focusing only on these grammar concerns is that in my years of teaching, these are the ones that I see appear most often, and they deal all with common sentence errors. And there are actually only three that I want to talk about. And so there's a document in course documents called Common Sentence Errors that has all this information there. So I'm going to share the document with you and go over it. So first of all, let me give some background information when it comes to sentences. Um, with a sentence, you think of a sentence as a independent clause. And what a clause is, it has a subject and a verb, but most importantly, it can stand by itself as an individual sentence. So, for instance, if I were to say, the sun came out this morning, that's an independent clause. The subject is the sun, the verb is came. And then when you put all of that together, that stands by itself as an independent sentence, is a complete thought. A dependent clause is a group of words that, although it may have a subject and a verb, it is not a complete thought and will be incomplete. So, for instance, if I were to say, since I started running, that's not a complete thought. It still has a subject, I, and it has a verb, begin. But when you read it all together, it's incomplete. And the reason why that one's incomplete is because it has that word since there, which sets the reader up to expect something more. So when it comes to writing sentences, uh, simple sentences, which is just a subject and a verb, are pretty easy to write. But the thing that you want to do is you want to avoid having your papers composed of nothing but simple sentences, because that becomes a little monotonous if everything is just one simple sentence with one subject and one verb. And so to show complexity, you'll need to create different sentence types like the compound sentence or a complex sentence or compound complex. However, when you start to create more complex sentences, the likelihood of making mistakes also increases. And so what this handout is over just some of those most common mistakes. And so the three most common mistakes are comma splices, run-ons that are sometimes also called fused sentences, and fragments. And if you can see by the handout, a comma splice is when two independent clauses are combined with just a comma. And so here's an example. The cafeteria food has improved, comma, the school privatized the operation. This is incorrect. You cannot use a comma to join two complete sentences. There are four ways to correct the comma splice. The easiest thing to do is just to make them two separate sentences. So we notice here I put a period after improve and then capitalize the. But this is that issue that if you end up with a lot of short sentences like this becomes monotonous. Another thing that you can do is use a semicolon between the two. So you see here with the semicolon, that is also correct. The only thing that I want to caution you about with the semicolon is you want to use that sparingly, and you only want to use it between two sentences if the two sentences are closely related to each other. So if it's that the second sentence really explains the first sentence and there's a close relationship, then it's okay to use the semicolon. But if they don't have that connection, you don't want to do that. So don't overuse the semicolon. Like for instance, in a paper that I say is what, perhaps 3 to 4 pages, maybe you'll use 3 to 4 semicolons maximum, so you don't want to overuse that. Another way to join two sentences, and this is the most popular way, is to use something called a coordinating conjunction. There are 7 coordinating conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. In course documents, there's another document called coordinating conjunction that explains those coordinating conjunctions, because you can't use them interchangeably, because different coordinating conjunctions means different things. Like for instance, and is similarity, but is contrast, or shows an option. Honestly, if you just use but, and or as your conjunctions, you're fine. But if you do want to show more variety in your essay writing, you can use the other 4 as well. But make sure that you're using them correctly and that you're using the conjunction that works for the meaning of your sentence. The only punctuation rule to know here is that if you're going to use a coordinating conjunction, you need a comma before the coordinating conjunction. So for is a coordinating conjunction. Notice that the comma is there. This is not a major grammatical issue. And I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of this. And here's the information that I just said about the coordinating conjunctions. And then the most complex way is to change one of the sentences to a dependent clause. And you do that simply by adding a word that makes it so that the sentence can no longer stand by itself. It's like, for instance, see this word since. If I put the since in front of the other sentence, this is now a dependent clause. But you can read this together. The cafeteria food has improved since the school privatized the operation. There are a number of these types of words that you can use to connect 2 sentences. I didn't provide you with a list of them, but if anyone wants it, send me an email and I can put it up. But they're like words like although, because, furthermore, and things of that nature. So there are a number of them that are available to you, and they're called subordinating conjunctions. There is just one punctuation rule that I want to remind you of this. If the dependent clause comes at the end of the sentence, such as in this one here, you don't need a comma. However, if the dependent clause comes first, then you do need a comma. So look here, since the school privatized its operations, comma, the cafeteria food has improved. So if the dependent clause comes at the beginning of the sentence, then you want a comma before you get to the independent clause. But if the independent clause comes first, then you don't need a comma. And once again, this is somewhat of a minor punctuation rule. The next time a mistake is a run-on or a few sentence. And to be honest, a run-on and a few sentence is not that different than a comma splice. The only difference is that whereas a comma splice incorrectly uses a comma to separate 2 complete sentences, a fused or run-on sentence has no punctuation mark between them. And so the 2 independent sentences are ran together. Like for instance, the cafeteria food has improved, the school privatized the operation. So you have 2 complete sentences there that doesn't indicate where one thought ends and another one begins. The good thing about this is you correct these the exact same way you correct a comma splice. So make them 2 separate sentences, use a semicolon between them, add a comma in a coordinating conjunction, or make one a dependent clause. So it's the same way you correct a run-on fused sentence, the same way that you correct a comma splice. And then the last mistake is a fragment. And what a fragment is a group of words that do not express a complete thought. And there are 2 types of fragments. First, the group of words is missing either a subject or a verb. So for instance, if you have a group of words that read, for example, my mother's best friend, that's not a complete sentence. There's a verb missing there, and it doesn't tell the reader what the mother's best friend has done. Or if you have a sentence such as behind the baseball field, there's no verb there. So once again, that doesn't work as a complete sentence. And then the second type of the fragment is a dependent clause, and that's usually when the sentence has a subordinating conjunction of some sort, but it's not complete. So, for instance, if you were to write, even though I exercised all summer, there's a subject here and there's a verb here, but it's not a complete thought because what happened even though you exercised all summer? Or if you had a sentence like this, since my sister left to start college after we moved to California. Once again, that's not complete. What happened since your sister left to start college? You know, there are various ways to correct this. The easiest thing is you could take out the subordinating words. So if you remove even though, you can just have I exercised all summer, subject, verb, complete thought. Or you can take out since my sister left to start college after we moved to California. It's complete. Or what you can do is after the fragment, you can add a comma and complete the thought. For instance, even though I exercised all summer, comma, I still gained weight, period. Or since my sister left to start college after we moved to California, comma, I moved into her room, period. And so that way it completes the thought. So there's a lot of different things here that you can do. And that said, I'm going to stop sharing this because there's a few other things that I want to say about grammar issues on a whole. Even though this is probably not the best analogy to use, I often think of grammar issues in terms of misdemeanors and felonies, and I know that it's not the best analogy, and each semester I say I'm going to change that. But I said that because of this. There are some grammar issues that are just a minor inconvenience and they don't interfere with me as a reader understanding the content. So, for instance, if you have two sentences joined with a coordinating conjunction such as and you leave the comma before and out, when I read that sentence is still going to read correctly, and I'm not going to struggle with trying to figure out what you mean there. However, and so that's what I call a misdemeanor. However, if you have two run-on sentences, matter of fact, let's say that you have three complete sentences run on together with no break between where one thought ends and another one begins, then as a reader, the way that I've been taught to read and the way that most people have been taught to read, we read everything. And if I read all of that together, I'm just like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And then what I'll have to do is I'll have to go back and say, oh, this is a complete sentence, this is a complete sentence, and then I'll have to start correcting the word. If this happens too frequently, then as a reader, the reader stops concentrating on the content of your writing and starts looking more at correcting it. And so when the reader starts to do that, the reader is missing what it is that you're trying to convey. And if the reader is missing that, then the work is not effectively showing your argument. So in terms of grammatical issues, you want to be careful to make sure that the grammatical issues do not interfere with context. When I grade your papers, I do mark grammatical mistakes. And what I will do is I will mark the first instance of a grammatical mistake and explain what the grammatical mistake is and how to correct it. I will not mark any other instances of that same mistake. So if I see a comma splice in your second sentence, I will mark it. And that's the only time I will mark it. I won't mark any other comma splices. And the reason why I do that is my job is not to edit your work. And if I go through and find all your mistakes and correct all your mistakes, then you're not able to do that. And I can do that for you in this course, but then when you move to another course, your professor might not do that. And I don't know what your professional career is, but if your professional career involves one in which you have to write, then you will need to do that. So I will only mark the first instance and explain it. Does grammar affect the overall score? It can. So if there are so many grammatical mistakes in a paper, that it interferes with me understanding the content, or if I'm constantly having to stop and self-correct the work, then that will have some bearing on the ending score. And so keep that in mind. If the grammatic mistake is a minor thing, like you leave out a comma in like one paragraph, or something minor like that, then it's not going to have a real bearing on the score, because then I'm going to be scoring mainly on content. So if the grammar gets in the way of understanding your content, then that's when it has an effect on you. As I said before, in your papers, I will mark grammatical mistakes, and this is our only grammar lesson that I would do. I won't do any other ones. However, if there is a grammar mistake that I mark in your paper and you need me to explain that in more detail to you, please just reach out to me. Send me an email and say, hey, Professor Sexton, you spoke about verb tenses. I'm not quite sure what you mean here. Can we discuss this a little bit further? I was like, sure. So like if you want to meet through Zoom to talk about it, or if you want me to email you comments about it, feel free. So that's it for our one and only official grammar lesson for the semester. All right. Hope you're doing well, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.